All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Lions Guy Podcast. And today on the show, we've got Mr. Mike Burke, who's really a knowledgeable leader, also a high performer. So I wanted to get him on and share the wealth because in the little amount of time that I've known Mike, I've not only been sharing notes on this journey that we're both on because he's the host of the Always in Pursuit podcast, but finding fellow high performers, guys passionate about leadership. I always get a lot of wealth out of these guys. So I wanted to get him on the show. And Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself and what do you do?
Yeah. Hey, Dale, I really appreciate you having me on. So, I'm currently in the Army. I'm a Command Sergeant Major over at 1st Security Forces Assistance Brigade here at Fort Benning, Georgia. I spent the bulk of my career actually at the 75th Ranger Regiment over at 275, which is up in Washington State. But I grew up in Montana. I struggled as a teenager. As I talk a lot about it in the podcast, struggling a little bit about, who I was and, what I was all about. I was kind of a drifter kid, a lone kid. I didn't really have anybody that I fell into a bucket with. I wasn't part of the athletes, I wasn't part of the band or, anything else. And part of that was, just a little bit of my upbringing of who I was. But also, the big part of it is I just worked. I worked a lot. I was always interested in, trying to make money and, go out on my own. Part of that was necessity, because I don't come from, money. My parents were always kind of struggling to make ends meet, so contributing to the household there. But, part of it is just things that kind of happened to me when I was a kid. I had a lot of trust issues. Different people taking advantage of me and, different things kind of happening. I struggled with who I was, which is, what kind of led me into the Army. I did have kind of I don't claim to be, incredibly intelligent. I also don't create to be, some super athlete. But I did realize, I looked at kids that had graduated before me, and I looked at my small town. It's a very small town. And people that graduated before me, I looked and I saw what they were doing. And I was like, well, they're not doing anything. They're doing the same dang thing they were doing in high school. They just work at, the concrete, place or the beet farm, that's my town's known for, or, working for the gas company. Like, that's what everybody did. And I was like, man, that is not what I want to do. If I'm going to make something of myself, in this life, if I'm going to finally fulfill my sense of, or my lack of self-worth, it's not going to happen in this hometown. And I also had kind of run-ins with, some individuals that probably weren't the best influences. I did some stupid things as a kid, as most of us do. So, that's kind of why I joined the Army. And, I joined the Army to kind of run away from my past, but then also run to, hey, the Army will provide me with purpose. It'll give me something. And, I had the belief that if I work my ass off, then I can make something of myself. And, that still kind of holds true today, and it's one thing that I just absolutely love about the Army. It's not that the Army doesn't have its issues. I mean, there's nothing in the world that doesn't have its issues. No organization that doesn't have its issues. But, you're promoted and, things happen for you and you're given opportunities because of your ability to work and get shit done, and maintain the standards. And that's just really honestly kind of what I did. And, I really was not much of a leader until later on in my career. I didn't really kind of hit my leadership stride until I would honestly say probably kind of about 2007 time frame. I joined in 1998 when I was thrown into a next level of leadership because of an injury of, my platoon sergeant on a deployment. I was thrown into a leadership position that I was like, man, I got to figure this leadership out. I got to figure this thing out. And that's where I really started to educate myself. And I started to look into principles and attributes of what makes good leadership. And it's really honestly just been a journey since then where I've invested my whole self, eventually getting my, master's degree in organizational leadership, because I just recognized that, hey, as a good leader or as a leader, you can have an impact. It's your choice if it's going to be a positive one. The other option is it's going to be a negative one, and people are going to remember you and they're going to be impacted by you and they're going to make decisions in their life based on kind of your leadership prowess. So, I really just kind of invested in it in the last 5 years. I've invested in the kind of the thought, and I know a lot of people talk about it. They talk about it different ways, being transparent, vulnerabilities, all these different kind of things. But, I try to kind of simplify it a little bit that, hey, to establish connections, you need to have real conversations, and you got to be able to communicate, hey, this is some of the things that I struggle with, some of the issues that I have. I don't have all the answers. However, I might not totally understand because I've never been through the exact situation you have. However, I do have this thing that happened and it became a huge thing for me. So let me kind of influence you and let me kind of help you through that process and give you some mentorship and everything else. But I also think there's some trust that's actually built there. So, that's kind of, long and the short, kind of the influence and, the background of what, I kind of came up in.
And how'd you stumble? Like, what was the trigger? Like, was your family, what made you join the Army? Was it because of an influence from family, or the recruiter got you on a good day in the cafeteria, or what?
So I joke about it. I actually joined the Army off a lie. So a relative of mine was self-proclaimed to be in Ranger Regiment. Okay. And he was a Ranger through and through. And I was 12 years old the first time I saw him with the black beret. We had the black beret at the time, the Ranger scroll and all this stuff. And I was just completely enamored with it. Not only just the military, but then also being a Ranger. So that, I kind of made the decision when I was about 12 that, hey, I was going to join the Army and also I was going to be an airborne Ranger. And I say that that's a lie because come to find out many, many years later, he was not a Ranger. He was actually a military police. And all the things that he had said he'd done actually never happened. So, I'm thankful for it though, because
Sure.
I would not have taken the journey that I did. So I did not actually, I had a terrible recruiter, he was drunk as shit, when I was sitting there trying to talk to him, and he didn't actually even want to, give me a Ranger contract. So I went and I was like, well, that's fine. I'll just go talk to the Marines. So I went and talked to the Marines, and, I sat down with this gunny, and I was like, it was kind of funny. I feel bad now, like kind of looking at it, because this guy's like probably at the time was like, oh man, I got this guy. Like he's all in. Cause I was just asking all the right questions and everything else. And then this recruiter came back in, cause the offices were connected, and he kind of knocked. He's like, hey, I think I can make this happen. And I was like, hey, thanks, Gunny. I'll talk to you later. And I walked back out, and he didn't give me a Ranger contract. What he got me was an airborne contract. But I figured, hey, they're probably at airborne school looking for Rangers. I'll figure out a way to kind of get into the Ranger side of things. And that's exactly what happened. So
it's interesting, right? Like here's one for you, right? You see all these heroes, right? And two things, right? Like, and I'm talking the Lance Armstrongs, the Tiger Woods, and people put these folks on like a big pedestal. And then they find out there's some behind the scenes thing, or it's all been a lie or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like they get so distraught about it. And I always kind of answer to those conversations. I go, hey, look, so what? Like, what's that got to do with you? Like, you admired this person for these achievements. And they set an example, and you got inspired by them. And maybe in your case, like your cousin or whatever it was made this story up, and it inspired you, and you took action on it. That's all about you. Like, and because look, you see this stuff and people get all distraught and they're like, the world is over. Like, no, man, it's your world. You're on a path. And so what, whatever they do, they like, and I guess it's just the emphasis, and because we'll talk a lot about leadership today. I just kind of always go back to like, hey man, just lead yourself, worry about you, like let other people. And I don't even mean, because people are going to twist this a little bit to think like I'm saying just be all about you and no one else. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying you got to be about you first, and you can't let what other people are doing impact your mission, right? Like you've got to lead your mission, period. And yes, hopefully you can lead others and help and support and encourage others along the way. But our influencers can fail us. Our leaders can fail us. And that doesn't mean we have to fail, quit, give up, whatever the case may be, the way we see with some of these like distraught events when you find out like these pedestal people are actually perfectly human after all. You know what I mean?
This is a conversation I've actually had a few times. Guess what? Everybody is imperfect. There's no such thing as a perfect person. And, you talk about influencers or idols, like they're going to fail you. Something's going to happen. And it might not even be by their own hands. It might just be some external factor that makes, a reaction, outside the norm happen, and, they'll have a fall from grace. Or it's, you just look at it. It's happened multiple times with people that, they invest in, they look at, and they fall by the sword. I mean, I can speak for myself. I mean, mentors I've had, that I've struggled because of something that happened, and they lost, kind of that respect and, whatever I thought of them because of some misstep they had, and it's funny that you bring up like current influencers. And there's a couple that I currently think of, and I know that a lot of people quote them and they share things about them and everything else, and that's great. But I could tell you stories that would make you instantly like just stop following all those individuals like right now. Never ever block them. Like you never ever want to read another thing about those individuals, because guess what? Like they're not who they proclaim to be. They're not as tough and, and courageous as people they let on to believe. But here's what I've kind of come to the conclusion of. It doesn't matter. They're inspiring people. They're motivating people. They are calling people to action, and they're making people move forward. So good. Okay. So maybe they're not who we think they are, or, proclaim to be and everything else, but that's okay. That's okay. But I would encourage people that, hey, you can't put all your belief in a system, or I'm sorry, in a person. Instead, you need to, invest in kind of the system or the overall message. When I talk about always in pursuit, the big thing, because we got a creative person that kind of helps us out with that. We have a producer, and then, my wife's got a huge hand in it, and then we've got a couple other people that contribute to the blog. A lot of people were like, hey, listen, like you're kind of the face behind the brand. And I'm like, I can't be. Like I literally just can't be, because that's set up for failure. If a system, and this goes to leadership, this goes to mentorship, this goes to organizational, if it's tied to a person, if a system's tied to a person, what happens when it fails? That person fails. I could get hit by a train tomorrow. Does that mean that everything dies along with it? It can't, and it shouldn't. But in order to do that, then that means that there has to be multiple angles to it, and there has to be multiple people contributing to it, so that if something does happen to a one, it'll continue forward. And I think that kind of ties into, my leadership philosophy as well, is that your investment's got to be you got to sow so many seeds, and, and it's just got to be huge and depthful in what you do, that if one thing doesn't happen, doesn't sprout, or one thing just kind of fails, there's a million other aspects of it that can kind of pick up for it and continue to move the ball forward.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And on the persona thing, I guess at the end of the day, right, it's all about the story, right? The value is in the story, and stories can be fiction or nonfiction. So regardless, and look, I'm a big truth guy, but again, it's because, one of my core values is establishing clarity. And I think you can't have clarity if you don't have truth, as an example.
Yeah, that's fair.
So
Right.
I do, but I think that's in this case, right? Even I'm being served by these stories that are inspiring, and they're inspiring stories. But the value is the story. If you find out it's not true, yeah, I hear you. But if I guess that's that. Like, leave it at that. Like, you don't need to dig deeper. Like, I want to know more, and I want to disprove this or whatever. Like, hey, just let the story be told. Whatever, let it serve you. It's interesting, and you're right. I think the thing with the system stuff, I was crossed with this too. I guess in this influencer space, and I guess when I set out to do this as well, I'm with you, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I did Lion's Guide as opposed to Dale Walls, right? Like, you see a lot of like named stuff, and having built a business before, exactly what you say is 100% true. Like, the business can't be the person, because when that person ends, that business ends. And also, you can't be the one doing it all. I don't know. I mean, I think you can serve it as a as a leader and a big part of the brand and all that stuff. But if you are the brand, it's got a shelf life, to a
Yeah,
degree. So
absolutely. I mean, we all have a shelf life, but I mean, I think all of us desire to have things continue on past us, to leave, a legacy, and it continues to add people or, adds value to people. And that's the big reason that I do what I do is I want to add value to people's lives. Well, that can be a singular approach where it's just in the here and the now. I want it to be something, that's why the podcast was a huge thing for me because it will exist for always. It will always exist. There could be, and I don't, who knows how it'll exist and, how digital media will be, 40 years from now, but maybe 40 years from now, somebody's going to listen to it and go, wow, that's exactly what I needed to hear in that moment from that person to decide to make a change in my life and in my lifestyle, and that's amazing to think of. But that also is a huge responsibility at the same time, and, I know you and I've talked about that before, that it is a huge responsibility, especially when people, start to really, reach out to you and say how much it means to them.
it's wild. And I tell every guest this and people I talk to, it's like, whatever we say, wherever this conversation goes, it's going to serve someone at some point.
Yeah,
It might be
absolutely.
on the release. It might, like you said, might be 10 years down the line or whatever. But, you and I might not even think there was any value in a certain part of this conversation or on our podcast. But all of a sudden, boom, you get this message, and we get them and you're like, wow, and it's very rewarding. But, and that's why, I agree. Like, I enjoy having these conversations because people need to hear it. It's going to serve someone out there is going
Yeah.
to hear something, and it's just going to click and boom, Because look, that's what I've gotten out of this stuff. Like, that's kind of what also got me on this journey as well. Because on the streets, I would be talking to people about various content, books, or whatever, and I would be talking about some of this stuff, and they would have never heard it. And I was like, well, I want to broadcast this more. How can I meet more people and put more of the stuff that's serving me out there? Because you're right, this isn't all about what you and I know. It's about sharing the wealth of the things we've learned and making sure other people hear them from another angle, right? This personal development stuff and all that. Like I said, we're just soldiers in that good fight. So we're helping bringing other angles and perspectives really to the same lessons that are throughout our human history, right? How to survive and thrive in life, how to do that is not new, right? Like, people didn't just figure that out since the internet came out 15 years or 20 years ago, whatever, right? We are just now have another channel and an angle to deliver that information to those who are ready to hear it,
Yeah. Well, and I think, the other thing that, we talked about, your podcast, JT's, United Valor, which we're all starting to kind of work with now, and I got Ben Horton, who I've kind of, he's helped a lot in my, the start of my podcast. He actually goes back to 2019 when he actually started his. But I think the other big part of it is, and it's something that you talked about, is these relatable guests that we have on. They're not these high level, accomplishing these amazing things and making billions of dollars and everything else. These are people that we have on our podcast that are still in the hunt. They're still trying to kind of grind through things and figure things out. And I think there's just some relatedness that happens with the people, and they're going to be more relatable to people. And at least that's kind of got the feedback that I've got is that I've not been interviewing people and I've not been sitting down with people, and I'm sure in the heck not, this person that's kind of arrived at this level of greatness. Hey, we're still grinding it. We're still trying to kind of figure it out. And it adds huge value to our audience base.
Yeah. I did a podcast with a guy named Matt Hanna, who's got this nonprofit organization called Next One Up. And I just love the philosophy, which was like, we're all in this climb, but we all also have a responsibility to reach back and help the next one up. Right. So we're all still climbing, right? We're not at the top, and that's a part of this. Like, I feel like, have I learned a lot of stuff and whatever? Yeah. And I want to share that, but I'm still growing. I make mistakes every day. I've made a ton of mistakes along the way. I'm going to make more mistakes in the future. and a part of that big thing is overcoming the fear of making these mistakes. Go make the mistakes, man. Like
Yeah.
go mess up and learn. Like keep growing. That's the only way you're going to learn. Go make
Yeah,
some mistakes.
fail fast. That's been kind of our theme and Always in Pursuit all week is, so we had this amazing author that I was introduced to named Mark Jacobson. He's just an awesome individual. And, he wrote a book, about failure. And, the bottom line is that, hey, failure is going to happen. Like, we're all going to fail. We're all going to make mistakes. We've all had podcast episodes that have just went off the rails, or you forget to record, or the audio doesn't turn out, or, whatever happens. But what did you learn from it? And did you annotate the mistakes, and did you, get better? Did you grow from it? But then also, throwing yourself into it, while I had, podcast experience where I was a host before I launched my first one, in January of this year. But the whole production side of it, oh my gosh, I didn't know a dang thing, music and incorporating that, and intros, outros, all this different kind of stuff. And then, trying to make it where it wasn't this huge, editing, nightmare that I had to kind of do. Was a process. And it's funny, I go back and I listen to the first couple podcasts, and if I could just delete my voice out of like the first 3, it would be so much better. The guests were amazing. They were awesome. They were telling their stories. They had such great messages to share. However, my side of it, I was like, who is this guy? What is this doofus doing? Like, why is he talking so much? Why are you like, I remember, I just recently listened to like the first one, because I'm starting to do, after show notes that we share in the blog. So I go back and I listen to the first one, and I'm like, stop talking. Like, I'm literally like yelling at my past self, like, why are you talking so much? It's just, it's funny, but you learn those. And if you're cognizant about learning from those mistakes, those failures that we have, then that's okay. And you make them quick, you adapt from them, and then you grow, and you just get better and better and better. And then the product and yourself and because you owe it to whoever you're leading, whoever you're mentoring, you owe the best version of yourself every single day. And it doesn't have to be huge, gains, but it needs to be gains made, and it's a huge belief that I have is that I owe the best version of myself every single day. And it's difficult and it's daunting, but I always come back to what would I want from my leadership, at whatever rank or echelon we're talking about. And then when I look at that, I realize, okay, then that means I need to be that leader that I wish I had, or I had in the past.
Yeah. So 2 things about failing, full disclosure, everyone listening, like, we had to start this over because of some errors, but good news is we started over. Bad news is I'm still getting those errors. So this is just going to be a great conversation for you and I, or everyone's going to get something out of it. And,
I think,
but that's it. Like just let's go screw it up. Jay and I just did a podcast on Man Search of Meaning, because I was telling him, I was like, man, I want to review more books on the podcast and things that have influenced me, got a lot of value. So he always recommends Man Search for Meaning. So he and I did that, but that was our conversation. It's like, man, let's go F it up. Like, I don't know. I don't have a good plan for this, but let's just go do something, right? Because you could sit there and overanalyze it. But I love what you said, like the fail fast thing. Like, yeah, go fail fast. Like, let's figure it out and get going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to throw yourself in there, man. How many of us, and I can even speak of this, how many of us have drug our feet afraid to do something that might fail? Or, when you talk about existing in digital media or blogging or anything else, like, excuse my, kind of candidness, but is anybody going to read or listen to my shit? Like, and you don't know, you hope, and you might think it's valuable. You're like, man, this is like the best leadership lesson I've ever learned in my life. This has changed me who I am as a human being, as a leader, and everything else. So you're just incredibly invested in it. And then you go and you're about to, put it in whatever kind of forum or, space that you're going to put it. And then you always have that like nagging voice in the back of your head that goes, but is anybody else going to give a shit? And it sucks, but I always, I talk about, James Clear, who submitted, 45,000, or it was like 4,500, or maybe it was 1,000 articles before he had a bestseller. He did over 250 interviews before he was ever on like a major podcast. He submitted, all these different kind of things before anybody actually listened to what he said, and then you look at, just other people that, started doing the work.
Yeah, and I think like from the influencer perspective and like what you said earlier about knowing if it's serving someone or not. Like to me, I kind of go like, I don't know if it's going to serve anyone. I'm putting it out there with my intention to serve someone, but whether or not it serves someone's not my goal, because I know that if I don't put anything out, I'm not serving anyone. So just go, just put something out, be well intended. And like you said, put in the work and let the results be what they are. And once you get results, now start making adjustments. But I think that's a part of, and we've seen that, right? Like with YouTube and the podcast, all that stuff, people are just doing it. Like the people you see out there, they're just doing it. Even if you go back, right, the most popular podcast in the world, probably Joe Rogan. Like if you go back and listen to Ground Zero, he's it doesn't seem like there was any intention to it, just to start talking with his buddies and having these conversations. I always go back to, because I listened to it religiously in the beginning, early days. And it was like, I remember like podcasts from a plane. He was like, yeah, I got my iPad here and I got my buddy, we're going to be on a plane. So we're just going to record our conversation, make a podcast out of it. Right. But I get a ton of value out of those conversations today, but like in Turning Pro, you sent me, it's just a result of just do. And it'll take you where it's going to go, I guess, instead of where we started this kind of little tangent is like, instead of being fearful of doing anything and getting going. So when it comes to your Army career, like, did you plan on just doing a single enlistment, or were you, hey, I'm going to be a career guy? What was the thought on that?
I definitely joined the Army thinking I was going to do it for a long time. I recognized that there was no way I was ready for college, maturity wise, money wise, a lot of different things. Plus I just, didn't terribly actually enjoy school when I was in there. So, I did, I kind of thought I was going to stay in the Army for a long time. However, my first 3 years in the Army were not what I thought they were going to be. The organization that I was a part of was definitely not one that I remembered fondly. I didn't have, leaders that I thought I would have that were professional like I thought they would have. And I actually, suffered some kind of discrimination, just because of my upbringing, my background and everything else. Which sounds kind of weird, being a tall white male, but, when I look back on it, it was true, and so I had actually my last, kind of 6 months of my enlistment at that time, my contract at the time, I was planning on getting out. I was done. And I was one of those guys that had the calendar up on the wall with the days counting down until I got out. I crossing a day off every day, and I didn't really actually know kind of what I was going to do. I was thinking college. I was thinking, being a police officer, I had a couple different ideas. Like, young kids in their 20s obviously do, also, hey, maybe I'll just buy a van. And I had a couple buddies like, hey, we're just going to buy a van. We're going to go around rock climbing. I was a big rock climber then too. So there was a couple different ideas, and then entered into my life a guy named Josh Wheeler, Master Sergeant Josh Wheeler, which, I encourage everybody to go look up his story. Unfortunately, he was killed, in Iraq, rescuing some hostages there. He entered my life and he became my squad leader. And so you fast forward that 6 months, I re-enlisted. I was now a young sergeant, and quite frankly, I couldn't think of doing anything else with my life. And the reason I always highlight that is because it's amazing what one individual can do in your life. And Josh showed me what it meant to be a leader, to care about your soldiers, to care about the individuals, in your responsibility. And, what a responsibility that was and what you needed to do by leading by example. And Josh wasn't perfect. He wasn't great. He made tons of mistakes. He was he was a wild child at times. He used to come up with some pretty harebrained ideas that I look back on now and I'm like, Jesus Christ, I'm surprised we didn't kill anybody. But, the point is that, he never asked anybody to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. And it was always about, hey, training. He used to have two different kind of sayings that I've repeated I repeat quite a bit is, you need to train like it's the last time you will before you go into combat.
Mm.
And the point he was saying is, you don't know when things are going to happen. And so you need to make every training exercise count. And he used to say the same thing about physical fitness. Hey, you need to do physical fitness like it's the last time you might be able to do it before you go into combat. And what's crazy about that is that this is the early part of 2001 the year 2000 when Josh entered my life, right at the end of the year. And then 2001, we were, in Germany when September 11th happened. So then all of a sudden, this whole different kind of mentality about training and leadership and everything else that Josh had taught us, became extremely relevant. Because then shortly after that, the towers fell and we found ourselves in Afghanistan. We found ourselves deployed. And we had trained for our last time. We had done our last, set of physical fitness before we deployed to combat. And then, what happened, that deployment, was a little bit different, and it was, definitely not as kinetic right at the beginning that we thought it was going to be. But, over time it did. And then, deployments after that definitely relied on that mentality quite a bit because, and this is not something that Josh said, but it's something that I learned is, in combat, you're not going to rise to the level of your expectations. You're going to fall back to the level of the conditioning that you already have established. Because, that's just the truth. So, I definitely was not planning on being a career. And then, from there, there was multiple times where I had complete plans. I tested and done evaluations for police departments, at one point, the FBI, even, in 2016, I was planning on getting out. We purchased a place in Idaho. I had a plan to take a job up at the university there to kind of ride out the last 2 years until I retired. And then I was selected for promotion to sergeant major, so, and, here I am, many years later, five, almost 6 years now, later, still in. So I've always had a plan to get out. I've just always made the decision, some selfishly or for family, consistency, but some just because, the desire to continue to serve in the capacity of the military. So it's not a simple answer. There's no yes or no, but I definitely did not kind of have the career mindset in the beginning, in the on stages of my career.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's, I guess the value, well, number one, I love the value of preparedness lesson. Cause that's true, right? You said you worded it way better. I'm about to repeat it, but it's like you fall, you're not rising when you get there, you're falling back to what you're capable of. And especially in these deployments. And now, how many deployments did you go on?
So I went on a total of 14 deployments, 8 to Iraq and 6 to Afghanistan. Yeah.
Wow. And what was your role there? I mean, so 14 deployments, what was your job? What were you doing in those places respectively?
Yeah. So, 2nd Ranger Battalion, in the early years, it was very much just kinetic deployments, direct action raids. When we went to Afghanistan, it was rooting out the Taliban in the mountains and the villages and everything else, so either, mobile patrols or, raids to, kind of capture those individuals or to establish, safe held so that, not foreign partners, but, other allies could come in, kind of do elongated, operations in there. That was a lot of what I did in Afghanistan in the early years. But then I became kind of the very heavy Iraq deployment, my platoon and my company, we always just kind of went back to Iraq. And those were very, very kinetic times up till 2010. I was a platoon sergeant, I was in charge of a task force, which sometimes the task force would grow. It'd be almost as many as, 80 people that would be in charge of me, within the platoon and other different agencies. And, it was incredibly, kinetic, direct action raids that we would do. And then I actually left for a couple of years. I left Ranger Regiment, I went and taught ROTC. And when I came back, it was very different. It was different. The deployments were different. There were a lot of advisory roles. My last deployment in 2016, I was in an advisory role where I was, advising our partners and, helping them kind of, build organizations, build leadership, and, the tactics and also the formative part of, their schooling, and their accreditation programs to build different organizations. So, from 2001 to 2010, it was, basically just kicking in doors, blowing shit up and doing bad things to bad people. And then after that, 2012 to 2016, it was definitely on the strategic level, and kind of advising and everything else.
And advising, just so I understand, I'm hearing you correct. Like you were working with maybe locals or other influences to rebuild, right? You were going
Yeah.
in, cleaning up what'd you say, through 2010, and then you went back, and now you're
Yep.
helping rebuild. So, hopefully for our, which doesn't seem like it's turned out that way, but our exit, to get us out of there.
Yeah, I mean, that was the plan. And, I talked to Jay when him and I, sat down and did an episode, about this specific, subject of what's going on in Afghanistan. The plan was, when I went back in 2012, we were talking exit strategies. We were advising the partners, hey, we will not be here forever. We need to talk about how you guys are going to stand on your own. You're going to do things on your own. And be able to, maintain stability and control within the country. It was a very, very depthful conversation. And I even was part of some of the efforts to stand down bases when I was over there, in 2016, we warmed based 2 outstations and consolidated to a third one while I was deployed, because we were taking the early onset of, kind of the exfil strategy then,
Right. And with regard to your career and what you've learned about leadership, because you went on to get a degree in organizational leadership, I believe, if I recall correctly. Like, know what you know now, like what makes a good leader?
Yeah. It's man, this is a discussion that I've battled with, and I've tried to, because that's how human brains work. We always want to try to quantify the unquantifiable. We want to always try to, hey, let's pare it down, to these 3 attributes, these 2 attributes, what makes a good leader? And if I took a bunch of leaders from a million different walks of life and I locked them in a big room and I said, hey, for the next 3 days, all you're going to do is neck down. And I want you to give me the top 3 attributes of what makes a good leader. Man, they would come up with some amazing things. They would come up just with phenomenal things. And those 3 things that they would come up with would probably, you could write books about, you could write talks about, you could do all these different things, and they would be true. But what I've learned is actually there's one attribute that matters more than all of them, and it's passion. If you don't have passion, then you lack drive, you lack commitment, you lack empathy. If I'm being honest, you lack compassion, because you could have the greatest tools. Behind me, I have all these books, and a lot of them are about leadership and the human domain and, stories and all these different kind of things, military and non-military, that I could give you all the tools. I could tell you everything about, hey, here's all the great things about being a leader. But if you're not passionate about it, then it's not going to matter, because you're not going to do anything with it. So if you're not actually passionate about leader, you're not passionate about the people that are, you're responsible for, the organizations you have the charge to lead, it won't matter. So right, wrong, or indifferent, this is Mike Burke's take on the world. Passion is actually the most important attribute in my eyes. I can do a lot, this comes into, your direct question, about doing this for so long. I can take somebody that doesn't have leadership knowledge, maybe doesn't know how to be a leader, maybe doesn't even understand all the systems and the different attributes and the skills that it takes to be a leader. I can work with that if they have the passion and they have the motivation. I can teach them, because they'll be teachable. They'll learn over time, and they'll be really, really motivated by the cause, and they will invest themselves into the process. Now you take the other attribute. I could take the smartest, that has read and, has a degree in organizational leadership and has heard Simon Sinek talk in person and Jocko and all these different things and has done all this different stuff and has all the knowledge in the world, can recite front to back every leadership doctrine that's ever existed. But if they're not passionate about it and they don't actually in their true core care about adding value to people, there's nothing I can do with it. They can give great talks, don't get me wrong, and they can teach great courses, and they can actually bestow a ton of knowledge and insights to people. But what will it actually translate to?
Yep.
And I think a big part of that is that you have had to have that passion. Is you've had to go through shit. Okay. And I apologize, for the language. You've had to been broken down to your core, where you have been in your darkest moments, where you've invested in somebody so much or invested in something so much that you just felt it, knew it, and were committed to it through and through. And then it did not go the way you thought it would. And it made you question everything. And I've had those moments. I've had those moments where I've invested, my first platoon that I was a part of in 2nd Ranger Battalion, I was in that platoon for 11 years. 11 years, which is very unusual and not normal back in those, even in those times. And there's a lot of different reasons that kind of happened. So everybody in that platoon, man, I knew everybody, I'd raised everybody. And, I left and then I came back to that organization after 2.5 years of teaching up at ROTC, and I watched that platoon go through something. And I just had this deep pit in my stomach. And I'd realized what I'd failed to do was develop the leaders the way I should have. And it made me question everything about who I was as a leader, how I trained leaders. But it became the genesis of how I've changed my entire leadership since then. I'm huge about leader professional development and how you do that and how you establish the connections throughout that. So my point is I know I'm getting a little long here, but this is something, and pun intended, I'm very passionate about. In order to have that passion, I feel part of that is the process itself, where you've had that low time where you've really kind of questioned everything, and you've had to take a huge pause and reflect and go back to the core roots of what you believe and who you are and everything else, and invest the time and the research to go, okay, how do I do X, and how do I make that passion apparent to everybody else and those that I lead, that, hey, I care about you immensely. And I care about you not just now and here in your current performance, but I care about you 10, 20, 30 years from now. So very, very long answer to your question about what is the most important leader attribute. But this is something that I spend a lot of time talking about, writing about, and, I feel very invested in.
Now, you reminded me of, have you read Angela Duckworth's Grit?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that book.
I mean, you're singing it, right? Like because she talks about grit as a combination of passion and perseverance. And
right.
As I was listening to you say that, I'm like, that's what she was calling on, especially the passion side of it. And you said in so many words without the other word, which was the perseverance part. And, because you're talking about like the ability to endure and, and want it, and as a leader. And earlier we were talking about like, leadership as a job and to a degree, and, your choice to do a good job in whatever it is you do, right? So when you're a leader, you got to be passionate about being a leader, like recognizing like that is your job. And, there's a great, I'll say an organizational management book out there called Traction. And it's one of the things it talks about with people in their job, in their role, is they have to, what they call GWC, which is they have to get it, they have to want it, and they have to have the capacity to execute in it, in that job, right? So it was a good screen, like if you're looking at employees or team members or whatever, and you were going to put someone in a job, yes or no, do they get it? Do they want it? And do they have the capacity to do it? So I think to your point, right, if you look at leadership as a job, your job is to be a good leader. You got to get it. And then to your point about passion, you've got to want it. Like you've got to want it. And then you've got to have the capacity to do it. Because we've seen it. I'm sure you've seen it, right? The guys that are in charge, they don't want to be in charge. The
Yeah,
net result of
absolutely.
that is a freaking disaster. They take no responsibility for anything. They're not truly leading. They're just going through the motions, checking a box, just trying to do the bare minimum. And just leadership is not that, man. You got to have the right people up front leading, setting the example. Because leadership is not the one thing. Like it is literally everything. Like it is, like you said,
Yeah.
the empathy, the emotional intelligence, the example that you're setting, the way you communicate it. Like when it comes to being what it takes to be a good leader holistically, there's a lot to it. Like and this is where I thought you were going to go with it. Ultimately, we're like, I put everyone in a room for 3 days and we basically say everything, because there's
Yeah.
so much to being a good leader, but
Yeah.
you're right. You got to want it. You've got to be passionate about your job as a leader.
Well, and I mean, you got to treat it that, hey, it's not just a job, it's a profession,
Yeah.
and when you define the word profession, that means that, there's a level of investment, doctors invest, and that is why they're, called professionals.
Yep.
Lawyers invest, and then that's why they're called professionals, all these different kind of things. Well, leadership, whether we're talking about the military or not, it is a profession. Therefore, there has to be the investment. You see that, not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers.
Right.
And when I encounter people that say, "Well, I don't read," then I'm like, "What? Why? How?" Then you're not, because part of leadership is perspective. And how are you gaining the perspective, and how are you seeing the things that you haven't seen, the experiences that you just haven't been able to have? How are you gaining perspective on that kind of stuff? I'm reading an amazing book right now called Just Work by Radical Candor. She wrote the book Radical Candor also.
Yep.
Kim Scott. So
Yep.
she's, and it's all about biases and the root of our biases and the different perspectives, and the different kind of take on things, and the things that, us as two adult males, white males, that we would just never know because we've never been in those shoes. We've never seen those kind of things. So, not only is there the investment in, gaining those additional perspectives, but then also there's the subordinates that you lead too. They're a huge conduit. They're a huge untapped resource where you can get those perspectives, where you've got to sit down. I sat down yesterday with a young E6 female, talking about different things, being on a small team, being a female, being deployed to austere conditions, and having the conversation about, hey, here's, not only the expectations of you, but here's some of the expectations, here's some of the things that might happen, but we need to have the mature conversation about this, on my side. And then also, you with your side. And, there's got to be a line that, hey, you got to understand that people are just going to be jackasses and going to say stupid things, as, male and females are going to say stupid things. It doesn't mean they're necessarily bad people. They're just not thinking things through, and they're not realizing the value and the impact of their words. But I expect you to say something behind
Mm-hmm.
closed doors. Sit down and have the conversation and say, hey, did you hear what you just said? Here's how it made me feel. You need to fix that. That's not okay. Okay. Now, obviously, if they say something that's just completely out of the box, just wrong down to its root core, that's a different conversation. There's something that needs to happen about that. But I'm
Yep.
talking about the little small things, because what you tolerate, you perpetuate. And a lot of times that just things will just kind of go unchecked, going on scene, and people won't be held accountable, and they just culminate into these huge circumstances because no one said anything about it. So the point being is that part of it is perspective as a leader, and that is an investment on multiple accounts, and you've got to be, sorry, I was trying to think of a different word than invested in it. But, you've got to be committed to it. You've got to be committed to that because it matters. And that's what people need. That's what people expect. So get out there and do the damn work, man.
Yeah, and I couldn't have this conversation without making a call for courage, right? Because I feel like
Yeah. Right.
you've got to have courage to be in a leadership role. It takes courage to be there because there is that, right? There is the responsibility that you're taking, right? There is the possibility of failure in having that responsibility, but I feel like that's what we're starving. I mean, we're starving for leadership right now. And we've just got to have the courage. You got to have courage and do it. Like go be a leader. Like we need more leadership and step up. And I think just due to a lack of courage, we have more people not stepping up today for various reasons. But it takes, to be a good leader too, it takes that courage, right? To your point, like you got that extreme situation or something going on, it takes courage to step up, speak up,
Yeah.
because those issues, like you said, they grow and they fester and they get bigger and bigger. And when it explodes, let's say, as a leader, you kind of go on, or the next tier up leader, when you see this happen down the chain, you're kind of going, man, I wish you would have said something way
Yeah.
sooner. Now look where we're at. Because I always like, from a leadership role, I always told folks, when things are off track, the best thing you can do is find the shortest path back on track, right? Like, there's a
Yeah.
mistake, we find we're off. Like, hey, best thing we can do is find the shortest path to get back on track. The problem with not speaking up, not having the courage to say there's an issue or dealing with an issue, is you get farther and farther and farther and farther off track. So getting back is way more difficult than probably it needed to be. If someone just had the courage to speak up and be the leader to address the issue, call out the issue, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, can I add one thing on what you said, that
Yeah.
it takes courage to be a leader, and there's a huge desire for leadership. I would add on there that there's a huge call for and a need for authentic, transparent leader. But that takes a whole nother level of courage,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're transparent or you're authentic, people could be perceiving it the wrong way. Different things can happen where, it can go the wrong, it can go off the rails, and it can be taken in the wrong way. And now people have what you could perceive as ammunition against you, because you were being transparent and vulnerable and authentic and all these different kind of things. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. And it's something that I've talked about, and a couple people have asked me about it, even a guest actually, on Always in Pursuit podcast, because I did a 2-part series called Naked and Unafraid, where basically I threw all my shit out there, man. Like, everything's out there about my upbringing, my mistakes, issues that I had, with depression and, suicide and all these other kind of things. And, the question is, hey, aren't you scared that people will use that against you? And I'm like, well, yeah, I am. I mean, because people could go back there and they could do it. There's a million different things that could happen with that. But guess what? At the end of the day, if that's my demise and that's what ends up being the end, the end of my career or whatever, because, of my, vulnerability and transparency, then I guess so be it. But I think that we need more people that are doing that, hey, I don't have everything figured out. I haven't always been perfect. I haven't always had my shit together. I've struggled just like you've struggled. But now I'm on the other side of it to a degree. I'm not perfect. I haven't got it all figured out, but to a degree, I'm better about it. And I've dealt with it. I've done the hard work to come to terms with different things that have happened to me or other struggles that I've had. So here I am now, and here's how I can help you. And here's how I can help you wherever you are in your journey, your path. As you're continuing to try to move forward and you have your own struggles, here's how I can help you. And then, oh, by the way, I'm not talking about this theoretically. I'm talking about this from a position of personal understanding.
Yeah. And like we've talked about on and offline, it's a bit like people need that authenticity, right? Because you smell
Yeah.
out, right? Like the way we communicate with one another, like you smell out that you might not know what it is, but something's not quite right. And
Yeah,
and it's
absolutely.
just it's a drag on the effort, I'll say. I don't know, as far as leadership, like if you're a leader but you're not being transparent or authentic and your troops are feeling that, so now they're kind of half 3/4 stepping because they're not quite sure. They know something, they don't know what. So yeah, I agree. And there is that, because in today's world, you got to you're right. And here's what we're challenged with, is people taking us out of context. Because in my effort of being transparent, like I'm trying to fit an experience in a short form, right? I've lived something and I'm trying to put it in a manner to be transparent or whatever. But it surprised me over the years when I did that, how many times they will come back and they go, well, you said blah, blah. I'm like, no. But they hear it wrong, right? So you got to be careful too with the transparency. I
Yeah.
feel from my own experience, to a level where very clearly what your intentions are, and kind
Yeah.
of make
Right.
sure those intentions are clear when you're being transparent. Because we hear things maybe different than what we intend. So I think, if as a leader, if you're trying to be transparent, that would be my advice, is like, be very clear with your intentions of what you're trying to say, so they don't paint their own intentions, right? You don't just go, hey, when I was a kid, or when I was over here, I screwed this up and whatever. But if you don't tell them why you're telling them that story, and what it matters, they might walk away with something that you didn't intend. And that's where
Yeah.
the crap comes from. And you got to own it in the right way, right? Like you were saying, like, I kind of use this as an apology. Like when like my kids screw up, you got what, 4 kids, is it? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so when my kids grew up and they say sorry, I go, look, I don't necessarily want you to be sorry. I want to know that this isn't going to happen again, right?
Mm.
So when you're talking about being authentic, and you're being authentic from a perspective of being perfectly human, being transparent or whatever, I kind of look at it that way too, where you're being transparent as an agreement to say, I've learned from this, right? I'm telling you this because I've learned and grown from this mistake or this experience or whatever. And it's kind of like that apology thing. I'm not just telling you to tell you, I'm telling you, so I've learned something here. I've grown, and I want to share that experience with you. Does that make sense? Like, it's like,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
yeah,
No, I think, I mean, it's dangerous ground. And that's why, what I
yeah,
encourage people to do when I mentor them and I talk about this kind of stuff is you need to first have first you need to be okay with the things that you're talking about, meaning that you've come to terms with whatever kind of trauma or, tragedy or, vulnerability that you're talking about. You can't be, throwing it out there for the world to hear, or a group of individuals, before you've come to terms with it, because then
yeah,
there might be emotions that are spurred that you weren't ready for in yourself. And now you're trying to deal with those and communicate a message.
yeah,
But
true.
the other part is you got to start with some trusted agents and test the waters and have the conversations so you can see how it's received, because you might say it one way, and you're just being completely transparent. However, it could be perceived in the wrong way by the individuals, and
Yep.
it's on the responsibility goes on the communicator, or not to communicate it.
Yeah, no, you're 100%. But I think that's powerful stuff. And because it comes down to that relatability. I think, like, when you're authentic and you're showing that, hey, I'm forthcoming, you don't have to worry about
Yeah.
things being hidden, or even, and I look, like you said, we're all perfectly human. I kind of also, at the same time, one of the things I tell myself, like, through my life, and when I'm doing things, is I do kind of tell myself, like, don't give them anything on you. Like, we're going to make mistakes, but, like, don't give them anything on you. Like, don't, and I guess this is kind of there, but kind of dialing back a little bit to the mistakes we've made, or I'll say the where we failed ourselves. Like, I do kind of remind myself, like, don't give them anything on you. Like, when you're in this pivot point, like doing right versus wrong, or something stupid or whatever, or
Yeah.
unserving in some way, I've kind of, that's the way I kind of challenge myself. It's like, don't give them anything on you, and it just checks me, so hopefully
Yeah.
I don't have to be transparent about as much as I screwed up. I've screwed up plenty, but, but,
Yeah.
uh, you're going to say,
No, you're good. Go
oh,
ahead. Yeah.
the, jumping over to high performance.
Yeah.
So what's, what are you doing? You're getting it after it often. You're at time of this recording, you're in a race yesterday. Like, what's your routine look like? What do you do to kind of maintain, right? To stay ready,
Yeah.
so you don't have to get ready, as you said earlier in the deployment.
Yeah. I mean, so I am very, very draconian in my routine, especially in the morning. The afternoons and the evenings is kind of when things always seem to kind of derail for me, because that's always about, the uncontrollable outside factors. But, I'm an early riser. I get up at 3:30, 4 o'clock every morning. I've done that for probably a decade and a half. It's just something that I do, and it's partly because I like to have that time by myself to, kind of strategize, think, write, drink a cup of coffee, you know, look at, emails and look at other things, so I can figure out what I'm going to do for the day, what the day is going to look like and how it's going to unfold. And then the friction points that are going to maybe potentially happen through the day. That's the first part of my kind of, my morning routine. And then, 06:30 is always going to be physical fitness. Like, I've been this way for a long time. And even on mornings that I'm rushed, when I'm traveling, which I travel a lot, my rule is no matter what, at least 10 minutes, if I'm in the hotel and I got an early morning, I may get up just early enough where I can get, a little bit of reflection. I can write maybe just a little bit, answer a couple of emails, and then get 10 minutes of something in, even if it's just burpees for 10 minutes in my room. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and if I don't do that, then I will not be at my best all day, and that's not the case maybe for everybody, but for me, it is. Like, because if everything else goes to hell in a handbasket throughout the day, at least I accomplished something,
Yeah.
and, my physical ability is a big part of that. And obviously, it translates. It's a huge part of, being in the military too. You got to be able to do that stuff. But, the rest of the day is, just like you said, we have a lot of different things going on. I have a full-time, well, shit, full-time's an underestimation. I mean, it's being a brigade sergeant major, it's very, very demanding. But, we got the blog with AIP, we got multiple, we got a few different contributors to that. We got the podcast, we got the newsletter, we got the azimuth check videos. We're working on another project now, which will be another podcast, so we're trying to lay the foundations for that and what that'll kind of be. I will admit, we've shelved that just a little bit. We're originally planning for October for release for that. We're actually going to hit the pause button for a minute because I need to go back and, develop a better strategy for what that's going to look like, how it's going to look, and then also who's going to actually do all the production of that stuff. So there's, some different stuff that we need to do for that. And then, the other thing that, as far as pursuits are going, I'm working on, a book right now, a leadership book, / autobiography. And every day, 1,000 words. Not all the 1,000 words will be used. There's been days where I've knocked out 1,000 words and I've scrapped 950 of them, because it just, they weren't what they needed to be because it wasn't in the right mind frame when I'm working. But my goal is to have the main part of that manuscript done by next spring, so that we can start going around and get some edits done of it and look for publishers and everything else, early part of next summer. And that will be just a combination of, some lessons I've learned because of life, but then also the biggest leadership lessons I've learned in this life. So yeah. And I mean, the race, that was, Sarah's been, trying to get tied into the active community here at, Columbus, Georgia, and volunteering was about one of the best ways to do it. So, yesterday was her birthday and she's like, "Hey, I'm volunteering at this race." And I was like, "Well, I guess I'm doing the race so I can spend some time with you." So, so I went and I did the race and it was a lot of fun and I feel pretty good after it, actually. Obviously I didn't perform as good as I would have liked to, but for somebody that didn't even own a road bike a week ago and has rode it once, I'm overall pretty happy, with how it went. But, my biggest thing is I'm a big task guy. So every day has a list of tasks that I'm going to knock out, every week. And what I communicate with the AIP team is, hey, these are the things that need to be done this week. And now we're finally kind of getting into a position where we're working ahead. There was very much always playing kind of catch up and meeting right before the deadline. And now we're actually starting to work ahead. And it's important for us to get ahead so that I can really start to do some kind of, the analytical work for, hey, what's given us the best, value, and some things are not. So maybe we need to actually pull back on those and invest in other areas that are having better traction and adding value to people.
Yeah, that's the business of it. But real quick
Yeah.
before we leave Sarah, like, so checking out her profile, it's like she's a genuine badass, and
Yeah.
so she's a high performer. And I was wondering, like, so who's got to keep up with who, right? Is she?
Yeah.
Are you keeping up with her, or is she keeping up with you?
So my wife, Sarah, besides being one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met in my life, she is the person that challenges me the most in life. I did not marry somebody that is just going to blindly just kind of go, "Okay, that's okay, babe." Like, she's going to go, "Nope, that's dumb. You're wasting your time. Okay, here's, that's not good. You need to rewrite this. You need to do that." which it just, constantly challenges me to be better. She is a huge part of, my ability to communicate. When we first met, she's like, wow, I didn't know that the word, fuck could be, a punctuation, an adjective, a pronoun, a noun, and everything else. She's like, what's up with that? Maybe you need to rethink about that. You're a leader, you're supposed to be a professional, and, here you cuss all the time. Maybe you need to do better, and it started me on this whole path of, okay, I need to be a better communicator because it matters as a leader. So to answer your question, we challenge each other. We don't let each other get away with anything. We're constantly looking at how we can make each other better, and how we can support one another, but then also how we can put a best version of ourselves forward. And she is definitely the person that kind of keeps me grounded. She's the person that got me into yoga. Actually here in about, hour and a half, we're actually going to go, she's going to teach a class, and, I get to be her demonstrator, which I always love to do. And yoga has been a huge, the yoga and the mindfulness has been a huge part of my life. I suffered a pretty bad injury about 2014. I fractured my hip pretty bad, and my career was going to be over. And luckily for me, my wife was in rehabilitational realignment yoga, and she put me back together. And she's the only reason that, one, I could continue my career in the Army, but that I'm able to do a race that I did yesterday. I mean, I still have major hip issues because, the one hip's messed up because it's all broke, but the other hip's messed up because I've been compensating. I compensated for a long time, but being able to, one, swim, and then be able to bike, for 18 miles and then being able to run. I wouldn't be able to do that if it wasn't, for kind of what she's done for me in terms of yoga.
Yeah. And I'm glad you called that out, because yoga is, like we talk like checking our ego as man a little bit, like yoga, you think like the ladies with their spandex pants and a hot room on their pads or whatever. But I'm with you. I've solved some, I'll say, mobility issues that no one else could figure out, surgeons, whatever, through yoga. Just, I just started through the pandemic, but I would fall into these stretches going, hey, man, I can move my shoulder again after doing that, or whatever the case may be. So I appreciate it. I mean, I bring that up to guys like, hey man, that back or shoulder or whatever issue you're talking about there, like, you ever try yoga? Oh, don't do yoga, man. And it's okay, buddy.
I will tell you that there's a lot of high performing athletes that incorporate yoga into their lifestyle, and it's not all the granola crunching. The one that Sarah focuses on specifically. There's not the yums and the chanting and all this different kind of stuff. It is directly focused with two things: to basically fix broken people, mentally and physically.
That's good stuff. The and I appreciate what you said about her pushing you, because it's something that Jordan Peterson talks about. I don't recall where, probably in one of his books, but he talks about like choosing a partner that sides with your potential, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what you were saying, and because that's awesome. That's what you need in a partner, is someone who's not letting you be mediocre or status quo or whatever, but sees who you could be and helps push you to that. So that's an awesome partner to have, man. Good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah. You got to marry somebody that kicks your ass, and challenges. Yeah, absolutely.
So with Always in Pursuit, the podcast, how did that start? How did you fall into getting this thing going?
Yeah. So, Always in Pursuit started with Kill Tank Radio, which Kill Tank Radio was a unit podcast that we started over in Germany. The pandemic started to come to light. We were having the conversation over in Germany about how we're going to communicate with our soldiers and continue to professional develop and everything else. But on top of that, podcasts are just an amazing thing where you can record things and they exist for all time. So people can go back 10, 15 years later and they can still listen to that stuff, and the leaders that are the leadership principles that are outlined or whatever it might be, So that's where that all started. And I was not the one that was supposed to actually be the host of that. That kind of just happened. And all of a sudden, we're 25 episodes deep. I got people reaching out, out across the entire civilian sector, military sector, just saying how much it meant to them and how great it was. And I was completely blown away Obviously that came to an end for me because, I was PCS and, coming back to the States to a different organization. And, a lot of the questions were, hey, you're going to start a new podcast when you get to your new unit. And then it just kind of morphed and it developed. And then people were like, hey, you need to start your own. And so I did. We started our own podcast, and I kind of went in with the mind frame of I could have a little bit of different conversations that I would normally be able to have, because it's not a military produced production. Obviously I still got to be smart because I do wear the uniform at the end of the day, and I represent the United States Army.
And the other one
But
was real quick, Mike, like you,
yeah,
when you said Kill Tank Radio, that was like produced by the
yeah,
Army, kind of. Okay.
yep,
And
yep,
now,
it was.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was
Yeah. I was curious
produced
if
by,
you just kind of said, hey, we got to talk to troops to start a podcast, or if it was something like through the leadership, so
yeah.
to speak, that, yeah, cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was completely handled by the Army, the production or the public affairs officer, he edited it, he scripted it and everything else.
Oh, cool.
So, we started the podcast, and, it's just been a journey since, and I will say that, at times I was like, well, our numbers aren't the greatest, is it impacting people? But then just every time I kind of had the doubt, somebody would reach out, and somebody would say, hey, this meant so much to me, this, or this changed my life, and I know you've gotten some amazing feedback too. And I'm just like, okay, wow, this adds, power to it. And then really kind of episode 7 is where things really started to change. Episode 7 with Matt Nyman, we recorded the episode in early January. It released in February. 2 days before it was released, he was killed in an avalanche in Alaska. And, obviously that's, a thing within itself, and it was pretty traumatic. But then, reaching out to the family and asking them, hey, are you okay with me releasing this episode? And they were like, please, and it ended up being the last recorded words that anybody had of him. Wow. And the feedback we got from that, from the family and other people that knew him, and just, the amazing words that he said, Matt Nyman, said throughout the episode, I was just like, okay, like, this is it, man. We've got to tell people stories. We've got to capture their stories because we don't know what tomorrow holds. And it's just continued to grow from there, and, early part of this summer, I had, an individual reach out to me saying, hey, we'd like to sponsor it. And the sponsorship really just allowed us to produce a better product, but then also open up the aperture to things, develop the website, develop the newsletters, the videos, the blog, and everything else. Because at the end of the day, I'm a sergeant major in the Army, I'm limited by the amount of money that I make, with 4 kids. But sponsorship allowed us to open up the aperture and just create more for the audience and, everybody that just appreciates everything that Always in Pursuit does, and it's just off to the races. And we got some amazing people on the team that help with the copy editing, production, submission to the blog, and the kind of the creative department of everything.
And who are the persona of your audience? Like, who are you serving? How are you serving them?
Yeah. It is really, there's a lot of military, past and present. But there's also just a huge amount of, kind of civilians as well. More than I originally thought, that, just people that have either knew the guest, and then, the guests that came on the episode, they've continued to follow what we do, or, just found it, however they might have, or maybe I worked with them in a different dynamic, throughout the years, that are kind of drawn to it. But, leaders are pretty much the primary, the entrepreneur leaders and the military leaders, or the civilian sector leaders, is the primary audience that we serve. And, just like we talked about earlier in the episode, we're just trying to tell people stories. Stories are the foundation for later success, and hopefully it'll help everybody else in their pursuits.
Yeah, that's awesome. With everything that you're doing, right? Because it's fun to watch. You're doing the blogs. I see your azimuth check videos, and obviously the podcast. Like, what of it all? What do you enjoy the most?
I enjoy the podcast the most.
Is that right?
I love sitting down and just hearing people's stories, and then asking them questions. And I mean, I'm just being honest. Like, I'm asking them questions I want to know. I try to, and we get, I do get feedback, and I get, hey, people will ask certain questions like, hey, could you talk to guests about this? And I'll try to, I incorporate those in there. But I just love to tell people stories because they're just amazing. People just have amazing stories to share and just insights that just increase my perspective, increase my ability as a leader. It's just so much fun. The hardest part of the podcast is keeping them around an hour, and that's what we try to do because that's what people expect. But I would say well over 95% of the podcast could be, 3.5 hours because I'm just loving it and just having amazing conversations with people.
Yeah, I've gotten that guidance from the beginning. So behind the scenes on podcasting, like I got that guidance. I've heard you mention it and whatever. I'm like, man, I'm just here to deliver value. Like if
Yeah.
people need to fall off in an hour or not, but I try not to fabricate this. I want to be prepared, obviously, but I just want to have a good conversation that people can
Yeah, I
enjoy.
agree.
Like you said, this is forever, like, to a degree for whatever. But I just think about like where we started talking about this, like this is going to be out there. it,
Yeah.
it may serve someone 15 years. So why short it? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
and I get it. I whatever, but it's one of these things. Like if we're having a good conversation, let's go until we're done. Obviously, we've got other stuff to do today, especially whatever. But let's have a
Yeah.
good conversation because that's where the value is. Like having a good conversation and just talking stuff out, and it's going to serve somebody someday. Today,
Yeah, I agree.
tomorrow, 2 years from now. Um, you recommended to me Turning Pro, and you mentioned that earlier. What's your go-to when you're talking to people and who are on the path or trying to get better? What's when you're I'm sure you're given plenty, but what's the hey, if you haven't read this, read this book that you
So
recommend?
so I have 5 books that I kind of keep on my bookshelf, right by my desk. They're my go-to books. The first one is one obviously that is very, it applies to military folks, especially the non-commissioned officer corps. It's Behind the Colors by Scott Schroeder. And it is basically a story of his 32 years in service, and which is amazing within itself because it's 32 years of experience. But the thing that I love about it is every single rank he offers 3 focus areas, which I think, any leader, but especially non-commissioned officers who are just kind of in the grind sometimes in the military, it's very hard for them to kind of, neck down what their focus areas are going to be. So it's just an amazing book for that. The other book is Legacy by James Kerr. Sorry. I absolutely love that. When you talk about organizational culture, individual accountability, and team accountability in an inclusive nature, it's just an amazing book for that. The third book is one that just was added, and that podcast actually released this weekend. I know that this episode will release in a couple of weeks. Is Eating Glass by Mark Jacobson, and Mark wrote a book about failure, and which is not something that a lot of people talk. They do, you heard the catchphrases failing fast, failing forward, all these different kind of things. Mark talks about the ugly truth of it and the parts of failure that just absolutely stripped him to his core. And he's just ridiculously transparent and vulnerable in it. And it's just amazing, not only from the writing style, but just how transparent he was throughout the book. So that's definitely the third one. The fourth one is kind of one just for me because, it probably won't help a lot of people, but it's called The Decision Matrix. Basically use it gives you different tips and techniques when you're trying to solve complex problems and different ways to kind of unpack that and dissect that so that you can, lay, clear strategies and methods and techniques that'll kind of help you going forward. And then the fifth one is the Talent War. And that one's just because of the current job that I'm in. I use that book and refer to that book a lot right now because when we talk about talent's not always how we kind of look at it and we prescribe it, especially within the military. It actually has different attributes to it. And in an organization that I currently work into, we're looking for talented individuals, but it not always be how people kind of perceive it. And it's just a great book that kind of dissects that stuff. So those are kind of the 5 books. But when you talk about being always in pursuit, you talk about moving forward. The Slight Edge is a phenomenal book. Simon Sinek's Why, or one that I've actually just included in a recent map check, and it's right here. It's The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And that's a great book because what it does is, hey, what yes, you want to understand end states, and you want to prescribe end states. But we can't prescribe end states where they're limiting in their factor, meaning that they set a backstop that cannot or could potentially stifle growth. So, how do you develop strategies and how do you develop leadership principles and development that no matter what happens, it will continue to grow? And that's very, when we talk about being an entrepreneur, we talk about being a leader, that's hugely heavily tied to that, because the test that, and you've probably heard this saying in the military, the true test of your leadership prowess is what happens when you're not around. Or if I removed you from the circumstance, removed you from the position, would the organization continue to have upward mobility? And if the answer is no, you don't know, you're not sure, then that just kind of gives you a basis for where you need to probably spend some time developing people, because it should continue to always move forward.
Yeah, like it's build the system, right? Build the
Yeah.
system. Your job as a leader is to build the system, and so that the system manages itself, and then what you manage is the exceptions, right?
Yeah.
The evolution of the system. So yeah, that's awesome. Now, that's a good list, man. I saw you post about eating glass the other day, and I was like, oh, look at that. So that was already on the list, but all these other ones, those are good to
Well,
add. I've
stay
heard of
tuned.
some.
Yeah, stay tuned. We might be giving some books away today.
Sweet, cool. The um, but to wrap it up here, if on the elevator you're telling someone, they ask, man, hearing all you do, what's the if you had to explain to someone what makes you successful, what would you say?
What has been key to my success is hard work. And when I fail, I quickly assess what happened, the mistakes that were made, so that I can offer a pivot point so I can continue to do the work. I'm not the smartest. I'm not the fastest. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. But I will just continue to work. I will continue to move forward. And when there's setbacks, well, I'll just grind through them. And sometimes to a fault. Sometimes I can be so persistent that you could actually look at it like, hey, man, maybe you just need to reassess. And I do. And I've gotten better at that. Time and wisdom and age and everything else has definitely helped with that. But my ability is just the ability to outwork people, and the consistency that's kind of performed through that.
Yeah, and you can tell, man, even when you were talking earlier, which I really like, and I just want to call it out because I really honor it, is like the way you even get prepared for the day. Like, it's a testament to your hard work. Like you're gearing up, looking at your day ahead. Like, what am I up against today? Because and you're going to go tackle it, man. It's a great habit, man. Good for you. Well, as far as Always in Pursuit, how do people find it? What's the best way to get in contact with Always in Pursuit? And even if anybody hears this and wants to connect with you, what should they do?
Yeah, so I mean, people can find Mike S. Burke. I'm on all social media platforms outside of probably like TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, but every other social media platform you can find me there. You can also find Always in Pursuit. We have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page, and a LinkedIn a page there. Alwaysinpursuit.org is our website. You can find the blogs. You can sign up to the newsletter. The videos are always checked there, and then all the podcast are published there as well when new stuff's coming out. And Always in Pursuit, it's available on any podcast platform you use.
Awesome, man. Well, if not before, for another reason, maybe review a book or something, next spring, or when you're done with it, we'll get you back on and dig through your book, hear all about
absolutely.
it. That's exciting. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate everything you're doing, Dale. You're doing amazing things, and you're getting the word out, and you're offering a service to people that people are needing. They need direction, they need motivation, and they need purpose. And Lions Guide does that. And you're obviously the man leading that charge, and you're doing amazing things, and I appreciate it. But you're also at the same time not scared to humble yourself and go, hey, I need some coaching. I need some mentorship too. With the muster conference that you just actually attend with Echelon Front, that's just a testament to it that, hey, you don't have everything figured out, and you're going to throw yourself in the fray as kind of the training audience, so that you can get better too. And there's not a lot of people doing that, man. And I applaud you for it.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming on. And that's it. That's the moral of the story, right? We're all soldiers in the good fight, but we're growing too. It's like, say, we're reaching back, trying to help the next one up and share the wealth. And because it's what people need to hear from you and your leadership knowledge and your perspective, like you said. So because it's going to resonate with someone. Someone's going to hear your podcast, they hear your message, and they are obviously hearing it. And we got to be doing this. We've got to be talking real, honest, authentic, so we can all just keep moving forward. Get out. These shadows of social medias and everyone's stupid highlight reel and everyone's got it all figured out. They're perfect and all this nonsense. We got to be real with one another so we can grow. So we're all growing. We just got to keep growing, man. So no, I appreciate you coming on and bearing with our technical issues today. Hopefully this whole thing comes together. But it's tech, man. It's tech. But dude, thank you so much for coming on. I definitely want to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, maybe someday we will do a lion's guide to always doing hard things.
Yeah.
I just came up with that. I literally just came up with that.
Lion's guide to always being in pursuit, doing hard things.
I guess we could use all the words.
Yeah. Shout out to JT. All right, man. Well, thanks again. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks again, Dale.
Yep. Bye-bye.